Shining diamonds, lively violet eyes, long, full lashes. Flashbulbs explode as soon as she enters the room. Elizabeth Taylor didn't walk quietly through life. She arrived. The world saw glamour and it saw beauty, but what a lot of people missed was the hunger that was bubbling just beneath the surface. Behind the jewels and the spectacle was something much deeper. A woman who loved life intensely, who wanted to feel it all, and never apologized for demanding more than dullness, duty, and restraint. Hey there, lovely, it's Gata, and welcome to my channel. This is my little corner of the internet where I like to talk about feminine psychology, famous faces, and archetypal patterns that shape the way we move through the world, and how we can use that understanding to create a life that we truly love. If that sounds like something that you'd be interested in hearing more about, I invite you to pull up a chair and hang out for a while. I'd love to have you. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to hear more. So Elizabeth understood from a really young age that beauty impacts the way people treat you. It had been that way for her whole life. Born in England in 1932 to American parents, the Taylor family soon relocated back to the United States when Elizabeth was just a young child. From a young age, Elizabeth's looks drew attention. Lustrous dark hair, deep blue eyes, so striking and vibrant that they appeared almost purple, extra thick, full lashes. Very quickly, acquaintances and strangers were encouraging the Taylor parents to get their daughter into show business immediately. It seemed like Elizabeth was destined for stardom. It didn't take long for the Hollywood machine to draw a keen interest in young Elizabeth. But something that's notable is that she wasn't marketed in the sweet, angelic way that contemporary child stars like Shirley Temple were. No, even from a young age, there was something about Elizabeth. She didn't just get attention, she commanded it. And she was aware of that magnetism, even in her childhood. Elizabeth herself would go on to lament that she felt the different treatment that she got from other child stars at the age. Elizabeth worked during a time when Hollywood studios basically owned actors' contracts, and the studios were the ones that decided what roles and projects they would take on. Effectively, they were able to completely control the image of their stars, including Elizabeth. She was frequently marketed for her appearance, even if the role didn't really ask for that. And it didn't take long for Elizabeth to tire of the narrow box that they placed her in. She got sick of being typecast as this insatiable, dark, femme fatale figure. But here's where Elizabeth really started coming into her own. She didn't let that resentment cloud her natural magnetism. Instead, she strategically leaned into society's expectations of her. Liz would go on to star in classic films like National Velvet, Giant, and of course, Cleopatra, who has also happened to make an appearance on this channel before, if you're interested in checking that out after this video. Cleopatra in particular is known as one of her most influential and iconic roles, and perhaps not for the reason that you're expecting. Yes, of course, the makeup and the costumes and the jewelry were to die for. Yes, her steamy on-set romance became the stuff of Hollywood legend. More on that later. But it was even more than that, because Elizabeth's starring role as Cleopatra became a historic moment, not just for herself, but for the Hollywood industry as a whole. For playing the role of Cleopatra in the film, Elizabeth Taylor became the first actor to ever be paid $1 million for a role. And this is where Liz's intelligence within her lover archetype really shines through. She could have allowed bitterness about her typecasting lead her decisions and end her film career. But instead, she made the strategic choice and decided to lean into it. Not the way that Hollywood wanted to define who she was, but on her own terms. And she made it work for her. That strategic use of allure is sophisticated lover energy. Elizabeth refused to let the public perception of her influence how she felt about herself. Sure, she played into it for her benefit, give the people what they want, right? But she didn't let that identity consume her. That's perhaps one of the biggest lover lessons that we can learn from Elizabeth Taylor. Because here's what she understood. There's power and magnetism in beauty, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that. On the contrary, the lover knows that beauty can open doors. They appreciate that. They luxuriate in it. They seek out that beauty at every opportunity that they can. But the healthy, grounded lover is able to keep this all in perspective. Yes, beauty and allure can open doors, but the end goal shouldn't be just walking through the threshold. The healthy, embodied lover knows that what matters the most is what you do when you enter the room. Beauty may hold the key, but it's up to you to use it to get somewhere. What made Elizabeth particularly unforgettable was never just beauty. Sure, beauty gets attention, but feeling is what holds it. And Elizabeth, she had emotional vividness. On screen, Elizabeth was able to be both charming, witty, and good-humored, while also embodying intensity, vulnerability, and seduction. She was so dynamic on screen that she felt alive, like she was standing right in front of you. Even on the rare occasions where she wasn't being typecast into the alluring femme fatale role, she was able to capture audiences. One of the most notable examples of this juxtaposition is her film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Elizabeth, who had always been seen in such a glamorous light, completely shattered audiences' expectations of her. She threw herself in the role. She gained weight, she dragged down her appearance, she came across as bitter and cynical and angry. And audiences were delightedly surprised by this switch up for this actress that they'd known for such a long time. They were intrigued by her emotional complexity and the way that she was able to shift gears into this completely different type of character. They'd never seen this side of her before, and it made her even more compelling that she was able to shift so seamlessly between these two roles. I think what's even more important about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is that she was actually good in this role. It was a really validating moment for her and her craft as an actor. She was able to breathe her own brand of light and charm into this very abrasive, bitter character. And this is another great example of lover archetype mastery, because where other people see drabness and flatness, Elizabeth saw emotional complexity and an opportunity to subvert expectations. The lover archetype becomes truly unforgettable when you have depth to back up the beauty. Now, we cannot talk about Elizabeth Taylor embodying the lover archetype without talking about romance, because Liz was a woman who loved being in love. One of her most notable claims to fame is her 8 marriages to 7 different men. And that's not because she was shallow. It's because she loved love, the emotional connection, the passion, the excitement. In her later years, Liz was also able to look back and reflect on her choice to marry as often as she did, and she attributes it to her strict upbringing and traditional beliefs about marriage and relationships. Either way, it became very clear to Elizabeth and the public at large that marriage symbolized something deep for her: hope, devotion, and the promise of a new beginning. At just 18 years old, Elizabeth took her first walk down the aisle, marrying hotel heir Conrad Hilton. Yes, those Hiltons. This first marriage is a really great symbol of Elizabeth's youthful naivete. In her later years, she would describe how this marriage was her attempt at escape. You have to remember that she'd been a child star for years at that point. She was used to being controlled by her parents, by her production company, and she looked at this marriage as the opportunity for her to finally gain control of her life. But her happily ever after wasn't to be this time around. The marriage lasted about 8 months before she realized this was not the fairy tale escape she'd been hoping for. At just 20 years old, Elizabeth married Michael Wilding. a fellow actor who was 20 years her senior. The relationship appeared to be mutually beneficial. Elizabeth was finally going to get the stability and the structure that she'd been craving for such a long time. Michael, an actor who was kind of down on his luck, was hoping that being linked with Elizabeth would add a boost to his career. Out of love for her husband and the strong need to make her marriage work, Elizabeth accepted roles and projects that she wasn't really interested in, just hoping it would benefit Michael. But unsurprisingly, putting herself aside for someone else didn't solve the problem either. After having 2 sons together, the couple split up when Elizabeth was only 24 years old. From there, she married producer Mike Todd, just a month after her divorce with Michael Wilding was finalized. Now, Mike Todd actually seemed like a great match for Elizabeth. He was so extra, just like her. He loved public displays of affection and extravagance and spoiling her. The two welcomed a daughter together, and it seemed like Liz had finally found herself lucky in love. But shortly after their 1-year anniversary, Mike unfortunately passed away in a plane accident. Elizabeth was crushed, and that raw grief left her vulnerable to anybody who was going to show her compassion and care. Enter Eddie Fisher. Eddie Fisher was a singer and a mutual friend of Elizabeth and Mike's. Eddie had worked closely with Mike on numerous occasions, and he was particularly devastated with his loss as well. The lover archetype thrives on emotional connection, and Elizabeth was certainly no different in this instance. She leaned on Eddie, feeling like he was the only person who understood the depth of her pain. The problem? Eddie was married to one of Liz's really good friends at the time, Debbie Reynolds. When Eddie and Elizabeth's affair became public, it completely turned her world upside down. Overnight, she went from bereaved mother of 3 to backstabbing homewrecker. Elizabeth was later able to reflect on this relationship, and she was better able to understand that it was a coping mechanism to deal with her grief from losing Mike. But that didn't stop her from marrying Eddie in 1959. And then came Richard Burton, perhaps the most famous chapter in Elizabeth Taylor's Little Black Book. In 1962, they started this torrid, illicit affair while they were filming Cleopatra in Italy. Both actors were married at the time. It didn't take long for the media to capture them on film, and the world was instantly scandalized. The Pope himself condemned their erotic vagrancy, as the two were regularly seen walking around Italy, holding hands, and flaunting their indiscretion. This marked a turning point, not just for Elizabeth and Dick, but for pop culture as a whole. Suddenly, the illusion of the polished silver screen stars had cracked. Private affairs were now public spectacle. Eventually, both parties left their respective spouses and married each other. Twice. But throughout their relationship, Liz and Dick were able to move through public scrutiny with strategic planning. Instead of resisting the frenzy that was surrounding them everywhere they went, they leaned into it. They worked together constantly, starring in 11 films together. They were constantly photographed by paparazzi, and not just regular photographs. These were pictures of them drenched in furs and diamonds, designer clothes, stepping off of private jets, and yachting in the Riviera. For Elizabeth and her inner lover, this relationship became a drug. The opulence, the glamour, the emotional friction, every part of it excited her. They remained married for a decade before divorcing, then remarried about a year later, and that second marriage lasted less than 1 year. Because decisions made from an ungrounded place rarely stick, even for an embodied lover. What we can take away from this chapter in Elizabeth Taylor's life story is that intensity is not the same as real intimacy and connection. Many people assume that the lover archetype is just for the young, but Elizabeth Taylor disproved that throughout her life. She continued enchanting the public, even as she aged. Film critic Roger Ebert once said, "The spectacle of Elizabeth Taylor growing older and more beautiful continues to amaze the population. She chose to age naturally, embracing each chapter of life with poise and grace." After formally retiring from acting, Elizabeth decided to take her love for decadence, beauty, and luxury and turn it into something valuable. She took her passions and transformed it into a powerful fragrance and beauty empire, including her signature fragrance, White Diamonds. Liz's perfume line was incredibly successful worldwide. She was a pioneer, being the first celebrity of note to ever foray into the fragrance industry. Her company has generated more than $1.5 billion in total sales. That's no small feat, especially for a woman whose beauty and glamour were once viewed as shallow and frivolous. Liz proved that sensuality and desire can evolve, can grow, can change into something new. But Elizabeth's mature lover arc was about so much more than just making her own life better. She took that energy and used it to make the world a better place too. In her later years, Liz started turning her passion into purpose. In the 1980s, in the middle of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, Elizabeth found herself overwhelmed with compassion for those that were suffering, including people like her lifelong friend, Rock Hudson. Determined to do something about this crisis, she poured herself into fundraising and advocacy for this newly discovered disease. Elizabeth was recorded as saying that even though she really resented all of the media attention she was getting, even after stepping away from acting, she wanted to take that attention and turn it into something meaningful, to use the spotlight that she was given for something good. Through her many philanthropic works, Elizabeth Taylor was able to raise upwards of $250 million for HIV research and activism. And this is peak evolved lover energy. Not just moved by love for oneself, but for love of your fellow man. Elizabeth's personal transformation seemed to have undergone the full 180 when she was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. From scandalous tabloid staple to gracious, elegant philanthropist, Elizabeth Taylor has always captured the eyes and ears of the public because she's always led with her heart. The highest expression of the lover archetype doesn't just consume beauty, she creates it around her. Elizabeth Taylor teaches us that the true lover archetype isn't just about being desired. It's about fully engaging with your life, to love deeply, to grieve deeply, to enjoy richly, to age honestly, to remain generous, and to keep your appetite for beauty without apology. A shadow expression of the lover is often chasing stimulation, numbing pain through romance, and confusing chaos with passion. But an embodied lover is different. She allows herself to feel things freely, to savor life, to choose wisely, and to transform pain into compassion. Elizabeth lived in both the light and the shadow of the lover archetype, and that's what made her so enchanting. She had diamonds, she had fame, she had lovers, and she had scandal. But the greatest luxury that Elizabeth Taylor had was this: she never stopped falling in love with her life. If you guys are still here, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. You know I always love seeing you every week. If you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you would give it a like and leave me a purple heart emoji down below in honor of our violet-eyed starlet. If you want an overview of the lover archetype to get a better understanding of why Elizabeth is such a fantastic case study, I'm gonna link the video on screen now. So I'll see you guys over there, or I'll just catch you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye guys.